Welcome to my channel. This is the host, and today we're going to be telling the story of the Whispering Woods. It was a beautiful night in the middle of summer. Three friends had decided to go camping for the weekend. After driving for hours, they finally arrived at the secluded campsite deep within the Whispering Woods. It was perfect. Secluded, surrounded by tall trees and away from people. There were only the three friends and their dog. They spent the afternoon setting up camp, cooking food, and playing with the dog before settling down for the night. Around midnight, the first camper woke up. He turned to his friend sleeping next to him and nudged him awake. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Hear what?" asked the other. "I don't know," he replied, "but I could have sworn I heard voices out there." The two friends listened intently. Then they heard it again, faint whispers circling around their tent. "Maybe it's just the wind," one of them said, trying to convince himself as much as the other. But then they started to count. 1, 2, 3, they whispered, keeping perfectly still, listening intently for any sound. They counted to 20, then 30. They kept counting until their voices grew hoarse and their eyes droopy. Finally, when they could count no more, the voices outside the tent seemed to grow louder. Panting and terrified, the two campers huddled together, hoping that whatever was out there would pass them by. But then they started to count again. 1, 2, 3. And each time they did, another voice seemed to join in. 4, 5, 6. By now, the whispers had become loud murmurs. Then suddenly the murmurs stopped. The campers held their breath, waiting for whatever was out there to move on, but then they began to count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When they finished counting, the tent was ripped open and all they saw was darkness. They couldn't make out anything outside the tent, but they knew that whatever was out there wasn't human. They felt it in their bones. So the two friends stayed in the tent, too afraid to come out. As the night wore on, they heard more and more voices, hundreds of them. By dawn, they had lost count. Too afraid to leave the tent, they sat and huddled together until the voices outside gradually faded away. Eventually, the sun rose above the horizon, bathing the forest floor in golden light. Still shaking and terrified, the two friends unzipped the tent and emerged cautiously into the clearing. At first, they couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. No footprints, no disturbed underbrush, no sign that anyone had ever been there. But then they noticed something strange. In the distance, silhouetted against the rising sun, they saw dozens of figures standing in a circle around a large fire. They were tall and thin, with long, slender fingers and heads that were too small for their bodies. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but the campers could see their eyes, glowing red in the morning light. The two friends froze, paralyzed with fear. They wanted to run, but their legs felt like lead. They tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figures in the circle seemed to sense their presence, because slowly, methodically, they began to turn their heads. Each movement was accompanied by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the trees. As the figures turned to face the campers, the full horror of their situation dawned on them. The creatures weren't human. They were tall and emaciated, with skin stretched tight over their bones. Their eyes glowed red in the morning light, and their mouths were filled with sharp, pointed teeth. The two campers broke and ran, crashing through the underbrush, desperate to escape the clearing. They didn't stop running until they reached the road and flagged down a passing car. When they finally looked back, they could see the creatures standing in the clearing, watching them leave. Safe at home, the two friends recounted the terrifying events of the previous night. They told the police everything they remembered, but of course, no one believed them. There was no evidence of any crime, so the case was quickly closed. The two friends never went back to the Whispering Woods. They left the area altogether, changing their phone numbers and even their names. But they never forgot what they had seen in the clearing. And sometimes, even years later, when they hear a whispering wind or see a figure standing in the shadows, they think they might be hearing the voices from the Whispering Woods. It had been a while since anyone had gone camping in the Whispering Woods. The woods were known to be cursed, and no one wanted to take the chance. That is until a group of teenagers decided to spend a night in the woods to prove that ghosts weren't real. A group of 6 friends, plus one date, had decided to spend a night in the Whispering Woods. They weren't scared, and they had plenty of beer. After drinking and partying late into the night, they settled down to sleep. One of the boys brought his tent, which was pitched in the middle of the clearing. The others either lay on the ground or inside the truck, too drunk to care where they slept. Soon, though, the partygoers were awoken by the sound of whispering voices. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but then they started to count. 1, 2, 3, they whispered, huddling together, trying to keep their voices down. The voices outside the tent grew louder, and the campers started to panic. They were now counting to 50, and the voices hadn't stopped. 1, 2, 3, 4, they counted, desperately hoping that whatever was out there would pass them by. But then they saw something strange. A pale light started to emanate from under the tent. It grew brighter and brighter until finally the tent couldn't contain it any longer and ripped itself open. The campers screamed and huddled in the corner as the light poured out. Then they started to count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as they counted, the light started to suck them out of the tent. They struggled against it, but it was no use. The light pulled them out of the tent and into the clearing. There, bathed in a circle of moonlight, stood the same emaciated figures from before. The campers struggled to free themselves from the light, but it was no use. One by one, they were pulled out of the tent until they were all standing in a circle around the fire. But this time, there were more of the creatures than the last time. Dozens of them surrounded the campers, their red eyes gleaming in the darkness. The campers were too afraid to scream, too shocked to speak. All they could do was watch in horror as the creatures advanced on them. Then they started to count again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And with each number, another camper disappeared. They vanished into the bodies of the creatures, becoming one with the horde. The campers fought against the creatures, scratching and biting, but it was no use. The creatures were too strong. One by one, the campers were pulled into the mass of writhing bodies until only one was left standing. The creature advanced on the last camper, and he could feel their cold, dead eyes boring into him. He tried to run, but it was too late. The creatures closed in on him, their red eyes gleaming in the darkness. And as they pulled him into the center of the circle, he knew he was about to become one of them. In the morning, campers discovered the remnants of the party the night before. There was the torn tent, the abandoned beer, and the 6 bodies lying in the clearing. But when they got closer, they saw that the bodies weren't of the campers. They had become the creatures. The creatures from the Whispering Woods. For weeks afterwards, people could hear the whispers coming from the forest. They were counting again, and this time they were counting higher than ever before. Thanks for watching. Would you go camping in the Whispering Woods? Let me know in the comments. And if you like scary stories, make sure to stay tuned because I tell one every day. See you next time.